Good afternoon, everyone. By my watch, it's definitely 2:30 p.m., right? So we will start with this first panel after the nice lunch that we all had. So good afternoon to everybody in this room, the guests, the organizers. And as we just witnessed in the morning, the launch of the campaign for the safety of journalists, this panel is going to be really a very logical follow-up to that. We together here with you, everyone in this room, will explore the various threats that we know of against journalists and media that they are facing today. We will kick off with a keynote speech from Inga Springer, who is a Latvian investigative journalist, a co-founder of the independent investigative journalism center Republic. And Springer has been recognized as one of the most notable innovators in Central and Eastern Europe by Financial Times. She has investigated propaganda, corruption, and social inequality. So we will hear Inga's first-hand experience regards the threats that we have been discussing today already. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm putting timer to be on time. And I'm old school, as you can see. I like presentations because I think after a whole day of sitting, especially good lunch, people become a bit maybe sleepy. So I want to wake you up a bit with a couple of slides. So can we please start with the next one? Because I can't click myself. And I will introduce again a bit with myself. Or maybe can I move? No. Yeah, I can move myself, so... Okay, very good. So who I am? As you already heard, like I'm an investigative reporter, I'm also a co-founder of Republica, and as for last 2 years, I think sometimes when local media write about me, they also say Inga Springer is one of most respected and one of the most hated journalists in Latvia. And how I became hated journalist, it was more or less during the COVID time, when people were confused and angry and disappointed on what was happening all around us. And we at Republica, we are a non-profit investigative journalism center. We have also like a fact-checking wing. And my colleagues are also official partners of Facebook. So it meant during the COVID time when we were reading all these, advices how to treat COVID without actually wearing masks and having vaccines, my colleagues actually were the ones who were putting these claims like it's misinformation, it's not accurate information. And of course, people became even more angry. And they wanted to express this anger to someone. And because I am not doing fact check, but because I'm face of Republica, they were actually exposing this anger towards me. And this is what happened. I received quite a lot of hate, especially starting during this COVID time. And then it was around 2019 when one day in our office, we are based in city center. At that time, we had a small room in a Stockholm School of Economics based in Riga. And one day, a man with the funeral flowers and a bottle of kind of liquid showed up to my colleagues because he was looking for prostitutes and witches who are writing incorrect information on social media. Thanks God, in his office was also our Ukrainian colleague. He is a man, and he pushed this man outside. But I wasn't there, but my colleagues were really afraid and scared of what happened, and they called to police. So police came in. They later gave out this restraining orders that this man come closer to me or office or to my colleagues, and they kind of started investigation. But after a while, it took maybe some half years, they shut down the case. They closed the case because they said that there were no proof of actual physical danger. And instead, what policemen told me is that I need to strengthen my emotional resilience. And I remember I was sitting in this office with two policemen, and they were telling this to me, and I started crying. Because I was like, you don't understand what does it mean. Like every time when I have a phone call from unknown number, I never know if this will be that man who is calling me. Every time I go on Instagram, I go on Telegram, Twitter, all social media, there might be a message from him. Because he was doing it persistently, I was blocking him, he was changing the names, registering new accounts. So he was persistent of kind of getting in touch with us. But after police closed down, he became quiet during this investigation. When police closed down the case, he tried to approach me again. And it all started by new. This time we already joined forces with other media because we learned that he has been actually this quite aggressive and verbally abusive, not only to me, but also to other media, other public officials, with people he kind of disagreed. So we submitted like a second claim to police. And again, from the police chiefs always, when we spoke, his attitude was like, yes, we understand it's a big problem, but like on real, like people on the policeman level who actually had to take some action, nothing happened. Because at the end, again, there is not evidence enough, or like one policeman said, but you know, we all, every day, you know, daily life, sometimes it happens that some words slip out of our mouths, which we kind of didn't mean to say to someone. And So second case also was closed down, and then police started a third investigation. And it wasn't because so much, again, of public pressure that time, but because this man, again, he was stalking one politician on the street, and he was filming and broadcasting it live on Facebook. And this, like really people were like, both society and also media, all like joined together and did this huge public campaign by saying, you know, reporting about it, that it's not okay. And then finally, police started to act by essence. Actually, it was prosecutor's office who started to work on this case very quickly. It was the first time after 2 years when prosecutor actually requested data from telecom company regarding this man's phone number. And then I discovered that he has sent me more only text messages, like on a phone. I don't count in this case all social media interactions he was trying to get in touch with me. And I even didn't know that he has sent me so many messages because I had blocked him at one point. And only now I know that the person doesn't know that I had blocked him. So he kept sending me all these messages all the time. This case case went quite quick ahead, and like already like after some months it was in the court, and at the end also, I think it was last spring when court first instance made the final verdict by saying that he is guilty, and he received the maximum of fine for such kind of crime, for stalking, 2 months imprisonment. But because he was released out on probation for committing another crime, where he already received 2 years, so now he needs to serve 2 years plus these 2 months which he got for stalking me. So, but what changed during this process? During these 2 years, if there are also journalists, I would like to share these main things which I learned from this case. First, and the most important, you need to take evidence and keep all evidence, like all screenshots, all text messages, everything what's coming. Second thing is also what I learned. It might sound absurd, but also during one of these investigations, police told me, yes, but you didn't tell him that you don't like this communication. I was like, what the? Like, really, we are always taught you don't engage with these people because you don't want to encourage them. And now I am blamed because I didn't tell him that I don't want this communication. But anyway, I learned from my mistakes. Next time when he again started all this by new, I wrote him like, I don't want this communication. Here is official Republica's email. If you need you have some claims, please write officially to this email. And I blocked him then. And I took a screenshot of this message so I could prove in a court case next time that I really told him that I don't want this one. And I don't know, it might also differ from different legislations, but also what police is always asking, they want to see that it was systematic stalking, that it wasn't like one time. And this is quite hard when you have these regular trollings, when many anonymous accounts like stalk you for a long time of period. But in this case, it was kind of more easy and more clear because it was like one person who was doing it all the time and all the time. But I think the main thing why actually things started to move at the end, it was exactly because of this huge backlash which came from public and also from media. Because in these times, maybe sometimes among media colleagues we have some competition, we are like maybe enemies in some way, but in this case we knew it's for all of us, for all of our benefit. And not only journalists, also for public person like doctors during COVID time and so on. So I think this was very important. And last, like more general data which I wanted to mention, because I'm in a way with one leg in this topic and following what's happening, I can see that there's growing more awareness about this. There are more research showing that it is really important problem. There are more and more developing guidelines for editorials, how to act, for police, how to act. But now there are, like, I think, 3 main stakeholders we should make pressure. And I think all together, especially big international companies. One is big tech platforms, because there should be some more push and pressure on them to take some action, like taking down this kind of systematic content and giving access to researchers to understand the scale of this online harassment. And on the other level, I would talk about national level, because I still think in many countries it's this attitude like, no, you're a public person, just don't take it serious. It's like nothing important, just don't read this. So there is no understanding from law enforcement agencies and also on editorial level. I could even see from my colleagues, like, why do you take it serious? Just don't read this one. But I think person who hasn't experienced, you just can't understand what kind of pressure it's when someone every day, every tweet you write, every Facebook post you post, there are always these, you can see coordinated people, anonymous accounts who are coming and saying how shitty person, professional, and whatever you are. So I think all this should be joined. Thank you very much, and thank you for all this discussion. I think it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. I think hearing personal experience, as opposed to us talking about the threats, is also always very powerful and makes you think of it in a very different perspective. So thank you a lot. But let's now also start the panel, where our purpose here with you is also to investigate what are the threats, what are the emerging threats, and what are the solutions that are being envisaged. So my name is Carmen Turk. I am a litigating human rights media law attorney, not far from here, but much more north, 400 kilometers north from here, Tallinn. And my connection to this theme is a lot to do with me lecturing on these subjects around Europe for the last decade, and I'm also a chair of the expert committee on strategic lawsuits against public participation attached to the Council of Europe. So how we have envisaged the next hour and 20 minutes, I forgot my phone, so I don't have time, so someone is going to show me the phone from time to time. Okay. So we firstly get all introduced, then in the first part we try to discuss and learn ourselves, or what are the threats that we encounter, and in the second part we also try to explore what are the possible solutions that are already on the horizon. So to open the floor, we heard from a journalist. So you must ask from yourself from time to time, why do people want to be journalists? Why do you want to participate in public debates when there are one conference after the other discussing of the threats and hazards that come with the job? Because let's be honest, journalism, it is a very hungry work, right? It involves a lot of legwork, you get sweat, you have to work long hours. It is very hectic work in the sense that it will rob one's personal time. It will rob one of the privacy that most of us enjoy. Thirdly, it is a very thankless job, right? If you do good journalism, there will be people who are going to be angry at you, and they will blame you of their own misery and all the ills of the society in general. And fourthly, journalism is not that glamorous in the end, right? It's not a glamorous job. You will sweat, you will get wet in the rain, you will be chasing your sources to get the truth out there. And in the end, it doesn't really pay that well, right? You don't get to be a millionaire being a journalist, at least not every journalist does. So why do they insist on holding the pen that we ask whether it is mightier than the sword? Regardless of the possibilities of getting sued on a daily basis for your everyday job, regardless of being probable victim of harassment, of attacks, of threats against you, but not only your family, your friends, your colleagues, regardless of the threats of, let's be honest, being murdered, right? I counted today morning. In this year, it is not that black year in the world as a whole. We don't have 67 killed journalists. We have 21 to this date, this year. But still, this is humongous number of people being killed because of what they do, right? So this is what we will discuss, and let's have a quick round, because we have creme de la creme here in this panel sitting next to me. And I will ask a question of, what do you think are the three top emerging issues threatening journalists and all other public participators, not only journalists, in your eyes? And we'll start with Mogens Jensen, who was already heard, having a very powerful speech just like 30 minutes ago, who is a General Rapporteur on Media Freedom in the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. And he has been in big politics since 2005. He has held numerous political offices, being a minister in Denmark, and is now General Rapporteur on Media Freedom. So your 3 cents to the top emerging issues.
Well, thank you for having me here. And well, you ask what are the most important topics. I have to say, following this now for many years, it's of course you feel concerned, you feel unhappy about developments, because even though that I think lots have been done from different organizations and sources, still we see too much still harassments, legal harassments of journalists. We see physical harassments on journalists. We still see killings. We still see lots of slaps being initiated, especially attacks also on women journalists, which we can see a pattern of that. So I cannot actually say what I think is worse. I think the worst thing is that it is worsening. It's not getting better, and that's why we are here to discuss how can we effectively fight this development. And of course, also I have some ideas, and in the Parliamentary Assembly we in January have to discuss a report I'm actually putting the last hand on now for what to ask our member countries to do. So I wouldn't point out a single thing. I'll point out that the situation as general is getting worse, and I will participate in the discussion on, of course, how to fight it.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. Secondly, the same question would go to Carlos Perez Maestro, who is representing DG Connect of the European Commission.
Thank you, Carmen, and good afternoon. On that, I was thinking we could think of 3 different levels of threats or problems with safety. On the very on-the-ground level, I'd say I coincide with what other people said. Looking at the data, on top of verbal attacks, physical attacks, I'd say that mostly the online environment is becoming worse and worse. And we see that in the data. I mean, increasingly smear attacks. And what's important to say is that these online attacks, they remain there. Because once it's on the internet, you cannot forget about it. So it's completely different from a physical attack, and yet it might be, in the long term, in the medium term, might be much more aggressive and negative. On top of that, of course, or along with that, of course, legal attacks, slaps. This is very clear. On a second level, I'd say, let's think about systemic issues. So you might say, okay, there's this member state where we don't see that many verbal attacks, physical aggressions, and you would say, well, it's a safe environment for the journalistic profession, and still you could say, well, it is like that because at a more systemic level, there is another set of problems, like lack of independence in the newsroom, lack of independent public service media, the threat that if you go to investigate some issues, your newspaper will not receive some state advertising, because this is completely intransparent. So you know these things that do not address the journalist as such, but makes the work of the journalist much more difficult. And this is also a threat to freedom of expression. And looking forward, I'd say, I mean, it's clear that online and artificial intelligence, that's been mentioned. So how artificial intelligence can be used and misused to produce more disinformation, and link to that the lack of trust by the audience, and how this affects the rule of law. So this is in a more general system. We heard this morning about, Matthew was very clear, when you lose hope in the system, what else can you wait for? And how can you convince more people to really become a journalist when they see that the audience doesn't really believe that there is any sense in what they do? Thank you.
Just next to Carlos Perez sits Sarah Clark, who is the head of Europe and Central Asia at Article 19. According to my information, you joined Article 19 already in 2019, and before that you had been in PEN International since already ages ago. So I'm sure you have a lot of experience with these kind of threats as well.
Thank you. Yes, in terms of the legal side, which is largely where Article 19 focuses, I think starting with what is really the most important and most serious issue is this ongoing impunity for attacks ranging from the killings of journalists to online harassment. I mean, Inga, it was actually quite refreshing to see that there was some justice in your case, and there was a process, and we're seeing, you know, in some cases, certain advances and certain really key cases when it comes to fighting impunity for crimes against journalists. But overall, the picture remains really bleak. This year, as you know, we had acquittals in the case of Jan Kuciak, but also in historic cases like Hrant Dink in Turkey. You know, we see impunity begets violence. It continues and fuels a context in which, you know, the price for killing a journalist remains just simply not high enough. We see the continued existence of a lot of very restrictive laws across the Council of Europe that really impede freedom of expression. Looking at countries like Turkey, you know, we've seen the proliferation of laws stifling freedom of expression online. Disinformation and fake news laws are of particular concern, but we also saw, you know, the attempt to bring in foreign agents law in Russia or in Georgia, which would have copy-pasted the legislation in Russia, and that was so bravely fought back by protesters. But, you know, those sort of really big threats continue. Of lesser, perhaps, immediate seriousness is the continuation of laws like criminal defamation across the Council of Europe region, including in most EU countries. And this is really connected to the third emerging issue, which is SLAPs, that we see an abuse of a whole series of laws, from defamation to privacy, but that are often used in conjunction with things like criminal defamation. And it's very exciting, on a positive note, to see so much movement, both at the Council of Europe and at the Brussels level, in terms of combating SLAPs. But we've a long way to go before we have what is robust enough to really fight this emerging problem.
Thank you for these thoughts. Public Service Media Ombudsman is here with us, whose name is Anda Rožukalne, who is also a professor and senior researcher at Riga Stradins University, has also authored a book with a very interesting title, Pluralism, Anxiety, and Acting Socially in Latvia.
Thank you. Good afternoon. 3 issues. Not to echoing other colleagues, especially Inga's talk, I'll focus on 2 level of 3 issues: visible level and invisible level of those threatening issues. The first, and very loud and very influential, is open and public attacks towards journalists and their content, which is coming from high-level politicians. For example, very easy calling host of the discussion program as a political prostitute, or questioning is journalists have a right to invite this or that information source to the studio. Second, there is almost 2 years where when we can recognize very well organized, well fueled and precisely orchestrated troll farms, trolling, which are constantly attacking journalists. Firstly, public service journalists and public service media on the daily basis, all the time. And of course, then the third, some audience members who learned from politicians and from those trolls, factory members, this anti-media discourse, which consists of belief that journalists are acting against public interests. Journalists are blamed about all kind of societal problems. What is invisible part? This is visible part. Invisible part is suffering of journalists, those harassed journalists, then loneliness, because I would disagree with Inga. I really support you, and we tried to cooperate in some of issues, but I think that still journalists are left alone with all those problems. And the third is that actually silence in a public sphere about this issue, because audience who is still believe in public service media, in professional journalism, they don't have any idea on what is the actual conditions to work on contradictive, on very serious societal issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Anda. Last but not least, we have Nicola Frank, who is Head of Institutional and International Relations of the European Broadcasting Union. So your 3 cents to the discussion.
Thank you very much for inviting me also here and giving me the floor. We have heard a lot of things already, and I think from my perspective, there are 3 main subjects I would like to mention. One is, and we've heard it already, is certainly digital transformation and the resulting power of large online platforms, social media platforms, in times where people increasingly access content via social media. It's important that there are some rules how this is organized, and that we don't depend entirely, and our members don't depend entirely on content moderation decisions of these platforms. So this is being addressed and discussed in many texts at the Council of Europe level, but of course very prominently also by the European Media Freedom Act, which is now currently discussed in the EU. And we welcome that there is progress on this subject. The next one is artificial intelligence. We heard it already. I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit of a threat, but it's also an opportunity. It's clear that our journalists have identified this as possible tool to support their work. But of course, what you need is ethical rules, how to use it, how to deal with this. So to make something out of it which is then good for the audience, which is transparent, and which really respects all the principles of freedom of speech, information, transparency, non-biased information. Of course, that is very important. It's already being used and tested by members, but also by the EBU. We have an online news project which uses this for automatic translation, for example. Then we participate in a project which is led by Reporters Without Borders, where it's about deciding on an AI charter in media and journalistic ethics. And then, of course, I can echo a lot of what was just been said. What happens here in Latvia, of course, happens also across Europe in other member states. And I think I can see, unfortunately, a general tendency in society where there is a lack of recognition of media as the fourth estate, as we always call it, and of the important role of journalists to be the independent watchdogs. And this goes in pairs with polarization, and a lot of times, and we've just heard it also with politicians who blame media of being Lügenpresse, as they say in Germany, or providing fake news. So that doesn't help, and this reflects, of course, in a lot of journalist safety situations. It does also reflect in let's say, limiting financial means for media and public service media, for that matter, which, for example, has a result in how investigative journalism can be carried out, because that's a costly exercise. So you need to invest in investigative journalism. And I've been told from the journalists who do this, there's only 30% of the work which you start in really results in a report afterwards. So it's a big investment. So that suffers, of course, from financial pressure. But there's also all the other journalist safety issues. We've heard it, where online harassment and disinformation, including by politicians, sometimes turns into real physical attacks, unfortunately. Reporting from the war, I've been told from the members, also from the newsrooms of our members, we all know that, but it's apparently lately getting really difficult, where journalists are deliberately attacked, which of course they shouldn't be, because there are rules for that. Reporting from Russia, we also know that it becomes completely impossible very soon. And when our members still go there, so correspondents try to report from there, they are threatened when they go in, when they come out, so it will be very difficult. And then one last thing I would like to mention, surveillance has been mentioned before. That becomes also a growing issue. But then there's a last one. We have witnessed now over the last months a lot of climate and environmental disasters. So it becomes very dangerous also for journalists to report from that. And while there is training, systematic training also for war situations, for this kind of situation there is not enough training, so there is a lot to be done. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you a lot from this. I very much like the idea that even though Inga just described her experience here in Latvia, and we are going to hear more from Latvia about the certain threats and then challenges, but yet these are not by no means specific to one or the other country. all of the Council of Europe countries, 46 of us, are experiencing exactly the same thing. I came yesterday from Tallinn to Riga, not far, right? But before that, I spent 5 hours in a prosecutor's office defending or representing a female journalist who has been attacked during the last year and a half over 300 times in TikTok, in social media, by a group of 3 people. And the prosecutor's office just are incapable of really initiating an investigation because they see that, yes, but you are not really attacked because of your natural person, you are attacked because you're a journalist. So this is something that you definitely should be able to kind of handle yourself. So very similar experience. So I think this is the same problem throughout Europe. And we will talk more about what could be the possible solutions. But first, I'll give back the floor to Anda in regards to, so my question would be, we heard Inga's perspective, and then you already said that, well, you also had some cooperation there, but what are the complaints that the Ombudsman office also must tackle on a daily basis?
Yeah, thank you. I'm receiving very interesting messages and complaints, but those related with the press freedom issue, I can structure as actually those who read the Latvian can see in my annual report some analysis. But yes, the loudest threats of information are 2. Somehow mirroring already mentioned issues. Those are submissions by politicians, even parliamentarians, or political activists. They are complaining usually on at least 3 issues. Sources invited in public service media broadcast, opinions expressed from those unwanted sources, and journalistic behavior itself. And this is all about, there is no precise, they usually cannot mention what exactly, which professional ethics standards or norms are violated. They are just unsatisfied about the opinions expressed, attitudes, and so on. And those applicants, they explicitly, they really want me to change immediately all this situation, and not only, complain or to shame journalists, but they really want, they explicitly wrote in their complaints that those journalists should be fired from their professional positions, and I am responsible for that. Even I don't have any business with the personal issues of media organizations. And then the second part of this issue is coming when those requests is not respected. Then they are starting complaints against me. They are trying to find somebody directly or indirectly to complain about my activities. The second source which is coming to my office, because I have quite a broad list of my duties, those are journalists which are speaking about they would like to consult about what to do with personal attacks, with the clearly mentioned self-censorship, and they openly admit that this ongoing harassment makes them to refuse to raise very important issues. For example, for Latvia, those are everything related with the ethnical relationship in the language issues, even changed attitude towards Russian culture, monuments, everything around that. And this is actually, caused by the changes, this shock and trauma after Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine, which created that situation what was mentioned at the end by Mr. Gutierrez, this some kind of militarization of public discourse about media, when media are perceived as a responsible about all kind of public security issues, and this actually is, I think it's a very important threat to press freedom. And then there are a very interesting group of complainers. I mentioned the well-organized Trolls Factory members, but some of them are somehow like ambassadors who are complaining to my office, who are writing their reports, even making screenshots from X or other platforms to prove their complaints. And as Carmen mentioned, I have at least two strong hats, and that other is academia. I'm a media and journalism researcher and teacher, and this really helps me to deal with those kind of complaints, because I have data, I have access to database, to other research, I can seek the context. But in those cases, when those trolls initiated complaints have been coming, and actually in a very frequent way. I have one of my complainer which used to write either 2 or 3 times per week, or even twice over a weekend, very often. And then I decided to use my researcher skills and to do some field work in various directions. And one of those field works were, of course, I investigated those attacks online. But as I got contacted by some of representatives, I just got a call to them. And then I tried to understand what's going on, and this is actually a very interesting experience, how they explain their rights to be violent and cruel towards journalists, and those conversations. During conversations they are trying to be quite polite and telling stories about their difficult life. But then again, I got the same kind of complaints full with the rude words, not only about journalists, but about myself, because I sometimes, mostly, could not admit the violation of professional ethics. This is I think some part of a story about while many forms how press freedom has been violated, and I would say that there is already some consequences in terms of pluralism and quality of journalism, because journalists, when they are coming to my office and discussing those issues, they are trying all the time to answer the question you raised at the very beginning, why I have to do this kind of job, why I am sacrificing my only life for that, and they cannot find this answer. And this makes me really, really worrying. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Before asking Nicola a very specific question, Inga, you said you have a comment regards this.
Actually, I have so many things already piled up for myself. And I wanted to clarify, I said in this case we all media joined in this exact case, but that's why I mentioned there should be action from editorial side. And when journalists feels lonely and isolated, I know this feeling. This is when I mean editorial. You need to have this support from your direct editors or so on. This is when you need to develop a policy on this one. But I also wanted to tell you, I was hearing this speech by Ricardo Gutierrez before. And I didn't have time, but I wanted to tweet what you said about regarding this Russian-speaking media. And I know I am calling it masochism act. Because I know when I will tweet, there will be 10 of trolls calling me again in all rude words. And not only anonymous accounts, there is really tens of accounts who will come and attack me that I am Kremlinist, Russian propagandist and Skabeyeva and in all these words. It's exactly what Anda is saying. But sometimes when I am in a bad mood and I want just to fight, I go and I start harassing trolls. And what I did it this week, because I was on a bus from Tallinn to Riga and I had several hours with bad internet, but enough internet for Twitter. What I noticed that they were attacking one colleague from Russian-speaking public broadcaster. And what had happened, I also fell in this trap. They have cut out one phrase from a program on ERR, Estonian public broadcaster, where she is saying that because of all this growing nationalism and splitting of society, Russians will become living in a kind of a ghetto. And this one quote was cut out of this TV and it was disseminated and she was constantly attacked. You see, Kremlinists are working on public broadcasters, that's the reason why we need to shut it down. So I had time and I said, actually, I agree with her. Yes, maybe this wording is not okay, because for Latvians, ghetto also means killing in masses Jewish people. But still, takes the essence of what the journalist is saying. So I sometimes go just because I have a bit thicker skin, just to support journalists who are not maybe so used to this and so ready on this. But I assume that these journalists themselves, they will not explain themselves exactly because we have I have analyzed, and also has done stories about this. There are at least 100, 200 these kind of accounts who systematically, you will publish something on specific topics and they will come and they will start attack you. And that's why in general, when we all also, what we heard today, when we speak, one thing is we need to think about trust in journalism. I apply it also to journalists ourselves. We need to more explain how we work, how we choose sources. We need to protect journalism well-being because we see of all these attacks and we can see that trust in media is going down. And partly it's also because of the second topic. I think it's important, it's this disinformation. What's happening, disinformation, misinformation, which is, there are conferences on journalism and online harassment and on disinformation, what we do, because it also affects trust to journalism, what's happening. And so I think on this global, on EU level, on international organization level, it's a discussion what do we do, how do we interact with big tech platforms, which is the main platform where it's all cultivates. And then it's again back to national level regarding journalists receiving from 3 people constant messages and it's just like your job. But when, for example, my last thing, when some time ago, again during COVID time, conspiracy theory people started attacking Riga's municipality policemen. They moved their name tags. It was before they had the name tags, inspectors, this and that. But when they started receiving attacks and these people started going them on Facebook after them, they removed name tags. But to us, they are saying, grow your emotional resilience. So maybe you need to experience more and then you start understanding that it's not so easy.
Thank you. Very insightful indeed. So, but now we turn to Nicola. So we've heard about the threats and challenges. How about from the point of view of public service media or from the European Broadcasting Union? Are the threats the same throughout the big Europe, or are there differences?
I suppose, many of the threats are the same or similar. But what is, you just mentioned the word trust, and I think this is very important because people want to have trust in news and information they access to. So earlier I said, that people access news a lot through social media, but at the same time, in the EU, they found out that between 50 and 70% of people don't trust the internet or social media. So it's a contradiction in a way. However, and some of you will maybe be surprised, but we have figures that say that in 90% of European markets, public service media are the most trusted news you can find. This is, of course, 90% is a good figure, but it does also say that in some countries it's not the case. And the question is then, what is the reason? What I would like to say, because this is the occasion to do this here in the Council of Europe, is that, of course, public service media depend on the context and conditions they work in. And we have also carried out a research which says that there's a strong link between the strength of public service media and the strength of the democracy in which they operate. So what does that say? It does really say that you need to give good conditions to public broadcasters to be able to properly live up to expectations. And there are a lot of standards at the European Council, the Council of Europe level, sorry. And actually we discussed all those almost a year ago in Vilnius, and I invite you all to maybe have a look at. There is a digest of all the standards which have been developed of all the years for public service media, and there's quite a lot. And member states of the Council of Europe have subscribed to those. And what do they say? They say, for example, that they must ensure, that is member states, that public service media have editorial independence and institutional autonomy, that they have stable and adequate funding. And that is also very important in terms of independence, because you can imagine that political influence can be exerted very effectively through pressure on funding. And it can be used to interfere with editorial independence. Now, how independent can journalists be in a situation to investigate on a government-related issue, for example, when the public service media is in danger of a funding cut? This Damocles sword was hanging over them. This, of course, limits their independence. Then they need a proper governance system, and independent regulatory authorities, and very importantly, a robust and broad and future-proof remit. And this remit also includes the obligation to serving all sections of society. And at this point, I would like to come back to what Ricardo earlier said, and would like to say that we're also very concerned by these developments here in Latvia, and the proposal or the to stop Russian language programs on public service media organizations. We also think that this undermines, of course, fundamental human rights, and they are enshrined in numerous international EU and human rights laws. And there is clearly sort of the right for citizens to access the media and impart and receive information, including in their own language. And these principles are also reflected in the current Latvian law, we understand. So it is really a worry from our side. We just think that a big part of the population should not cut off from trusted information in their own language. Then there is also, I just want to make this point again, it's the member states' responsibility to create the right conditions. As defined by the Council of Europe, and now there is a chance to also enshrine that at EU level. I mean, the European Media Freedom Act provides the opportunity to do so. We are a bit worried about what we see from some member states in this context, where they don't really want to go for very robust safeguards with regard to independence and the linked funding. Just, I'd like to say here at this point, I mean, it's so important. I mean, it's all about democracy. We need journalists to be able to play the watchdog role. This is very important. I think we all agree. In public service media, this is also crucial, and so we need the right conditions. I looked at a long list and I saw that next year is really the year of elections in Europe and worldwide, by the way. And in Europe, there will be over 30 national and regional elections, including for the European Parliament. So we need to have good and trusted and information available by journalists. It's really for democracy. Thank you.
Very true, that over 40 elections.
30 in Europe, 30, but I think 60 worldwide, or so it's amazing. Next year will be dramatic.
It's going to be a great year of consuming information, right? I probably forgot to tell you that whenever you actually have a question or an issue that you also would like to raise, make sure you somehow reflect your desire to intervene by raising a hand, for example, and then someone will magically organize a microphone and we will make sure that you get the floor. There is a hand. There are two hands. So we'll take 3 interventions if we have a microphone going around. But we have to keep them, well, we can't spend an hour, so let's agree 1 minute. It comes from the... No, it doesn't.
Hi, this is Nick Williams from Index on Censorship and also a partner of the platform. Thank you everyone for the panel. And Inga, your experience I think was a really interesting presentation. And yes, we see it across our work as well and in Scotland where I'm based. But one thing I think is interesting, and we see it a lot in online harassment, is when journalists sort of normalize sort of online harassment as the sort of ticket they have, the tax they have to pay to be journalists. And we see that when you approach journalists, they no longer report it as a threat to media freedom because they just think it's the price they have to pay. I'm just interested from the panel how we can challenge that normalization so that organizations like the platform and platform partners can get an accurate understanding of the experience of journalists, but also how we can make sure that all of those threats are also dealt with, as well as the more egregious ones, such as assassinations or imprisonments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this was more like a comment, but we can take one more. Does anybody have a microphone? Does anybody already have a microphone? It was? Huh?
How do you challenge the normalization of certain threats to media freedom?
We'll answer it during the next comments. I guess it will be answered during next 2 or 3 interventions. So
I have a microphone now.
Mind.
Thank you. I've got a microphone now. David Blencathra, United Kingdom. It's appropriate that politicians and journalists are sharing this conference because according to polls in the United Kingdom, we're both in the gutter together as the least respected of professions. But could I ask, to what extent do some journalists bring about contempt for the profession? If we look at one side of the world, at the United States, we see journalists in the Times, the New York Times, totally biased against the Republicans and issuing distorted stories. Fox News, totally biased against the Democrats and issuing fake news stories. And then we see some people in Russia called journalists who are calling for the United Kingdom to be nuked, who are calling for a world war and are fanatically supporting Putin. And that brings them into disrepute. None of that justifies, of course, the assassination and murder of journalists, but to what extent do the panel think it creates a heightened disrespect and contempt, leading to others, people wrongly to then attack verbally other journalists whom they're treating with the same sort of contempt we would reserve for those so-called journalists in Russia?
Okay, we'll take it, yeah. There is many faces for journalism, but in the end it is a cornerstone of our plural democracies. We'll take more interventions before the end as well, but because we have discussed the challenges. Keep a microphone, so you'll get a floor after the next panelist has spoken. So we have so many challenges, we have so many threats. So let's start with you, Sarah. As Article 19's core, right, is freedom of expression, freedom of information. And I am sure you are aware, for example, in case database, there are 570 slaps recorded in 2022 and over 800 in 2023. That is huge number of strategic litigations against public participation, right? So my question would be, me as well, as a lawyer and as a chair of the anti-SLAPP committee in the Council of Europe, I must ask, abuse of legal system and legal threats, how big of an issue is it for the everyday work of an average journalist and from the point of view of Article 19?
Carmen, so I'll talk about SLAPPs first, and then I'll come back and address some of the comments that were made, just from Article 19's perspective. As you note, so the case is the Coalition Against SLAPPs in Europe, and lots of our members, lots of our 200 members are here today. And it was a coalition formed after Daphne's assassination, and Daphne's family have played a really leading role in ensuring that one of the legacies, one of the enormous legacies of Daphne has been legal reforms, legal and practical reforms that would prevent the type of SLAPP actions that Daphne was facing. And as many of you will know, when she died, she was facing 50 SLAPP suits and remains the most slapped individual. And the law that we've been working so hard on in Europe, the directive is called Daphne's Law in her memory. In terms of the impact on journalists' work, it's been extraordinary over the last 5 years to see the growth in reporting of SLAPPs. By their very nature, SLAPPs are, they take place outside of the public domain in the form of pre-action legal letters. It's only the tip of the iceberg are the suits that actually ever make it to court. So what we know now is of these around 800 SLAPP suits that have been reported to case, and you can find these in the case website. Of those 800 cases, 65% are against journalists, media outlets, and editors. So it is definitely the media who are the most slapped portion of civil society, and that's a major issue. And those are just the reported cases. So we know that even these cases are kind of tip of the iceberg. What we know from the many country-level working groups that have been set up is that SLAPPs are a daily concern for the legal offices of media outlets. They're an even bigger concern for freelance and individual journalists who don't have a legal department to refer these to. we see in places like Poland, where individual outlets are facing dozens of cases. We see in Croatia, where you've just hundreds of cases against critical independent media. So it does vary in terms of the number of cases, but what's really interesting, and we've seen this in particular thanks to the Council of Europe's work on the anti-SLAPP recommendation, is when there was a consultation on the recommendation over the summer, we had 60 submissions from across the Council of Europe region, and we see that it's an issue that affects countries across the region. It's not an EU issue, it's not a non-EU issue, it is a growing, a major problem. Defamation is by far the law of choice, but we also see a rise in actions concerning privacy and freedom of information. So it's an evolving problem. And we are really thrilled that the Council of Europe has taken such a leading role in its recommendation. We're at a really important moment now, both at the Council of Europe and at the EU, where we're in negotiations over a draft directive. And at this point, you know, we've been sounding an alarm that we're extremely concerned about the direction of travel for the directive in Brussels. We see that key protections, in particular around early dismissal, around penalties for plaintiffs, are at major risk, and unfortunately they're at risk from member states who would usually be our allies on press freedom issues, and that's really worrying. So in this context, the Council of Europe's recommendation has taken on really a hugely added importance. We heard this morning from the Commissioner for Human Rights that the recommendations, protections in the draft form really need to be preserved, and they need to be treated by member states as minimum standards. So we would see that being the absolute minimum, and that states need to legislate at the national level to ensure higher levels of protection. But I think, you know, today we're here launching a campaign on the safety of journalists. We know that SLAPPs are an absolutely huge part of the problem. It is within our gift, it is within your gift as the member states to move now, both in Strasbourg and at this moment in Brussels, to do something meaningful. We're worried that member states will squander that opportunity in Brussels. We know that the Council of Europe is the key standard setter, so please do not take your eye off the ball, and we would really urge you to pass the recommendations, protections as they stand. And then if I could, just very briefly, come back to Nick, I think your point on the not ever becoming blasé about online harassment of journalists is really crucial, and something that Article 19 and partners have been really working with social media companies at the moment to call for much better investigation and flagging of online harassment. But I think we're seeing a real breakdown in those responses. I think, you know, we're all following what's happening at the company formerly known as Twitter. A lot of the threadbare kind of protections that were there are now gone, and that's a really key concern for us at this moment. And then just on the point, I think from our British audience member, you know, in the various declarations of the representative on freedom of the media, the issue of politicians denigrating or, you know, calling journalists you know, terms that undermine the profession is a key problem within this context. And I think we would really call for a much stronger adherence to the respect, to returning respect to the kind of discourse that we're using around journalists. So I think at a conference like this, and I think, you know, in the term and the declaration on journalism matters and journalists matter, we need to really restore the integrity and the dignity with which we refer to journalists. Thanks.
Thank you a lot, Sarah. I think you pinpointed very well what are the possible legal remedies that could be and are on the horizon. SLAPP is definitely one of those that needs urgent solution from the different states. However, I now turn to Mogens Jensen. Council of Europe is definitely, it tackles all kinds of issues, right? SLAPPs as well. But of course, in this big Europe, or 46, the safety of journalists is high on the lists in all perspective for the Council of Europe. So what is Parliamentary Assembly's take on the threats and the solutions that are being dealt with at this moment?
Well, yes, as I said in the beginning, it's difficult to keep a very optimistic approach to this, but we have to, and I also try to do that in my speech. And of course, what can be done from the Council of Europe, the Parliamentary Assembly, is of course to provide with the kind of legal framework and the right rules to follow in the member countries, and I think we are doing a lot in order to secure that. The problem is that the follow-up on that in the member countries are lacking, and what we see into is how to secure that when you have good advice, and you actually also have in convention some advice on how you put up the framework for public service media, when we have advice on how you should in legal ways secure that journalists can work in a secure way, and this is not happening in different countries, what then to do? And normally, I said I'm producing this report we do every second year on the situation of media, and there we of course name and shame some countries, and also point out where are the key areas where we still need to do something. And it doesn't seem like that this is